Namaste. I have a strange topic to discuss today. A little absurd. Knowledge is equal to darkness. Knowledge is equal to darkness. This was said during the prehistorical times from our ancient sages, from where Upanishads and the philosophy of Vedas, the philosophy of knowledge arose. It was said during those times, and somewhat in their words, they told us that the ignorant go towards a world of darkness, the ignorant. Whereas the learned, they go towards even greater darkness. Now the first is still understandable. The first is still understandable, but the second seems a little absurd. How can one say that? So, let us, this knowledge that we so much rely upon, which we depend upon, which we try to prove to the others that we are more knowledgeable in worldly affairs. So the subject of spiritualism by the ancient sages, in the Vedas, Vedas meaning knowledge, is segregated into two. Finally, to unite them back into not two, calling them as, or referring to that subject as Advaita Vedanta in the end. And how they segregated was Par Vidya. Vidya means knowledge, Par means beyond knowledge, and worldly knowledge, Apar Vidya. Or in other words, Vidya and Avidya. Vidya means knowledge, Avidya means ignorance. So worldly knowledge takes you and keeps you ignorant because it's highly limited. It's highly limited. Worldly knowledge is objective and relative of the subject. The subject is the metaphysical realm, the universe, and the worldly knowledge is the object of the subject, meaning a part. It is limited to space and time. And it constantly changes. Knowledge constantly keeps improving, keeps evolving, keeps changing, keeps accumulating, keeps shedding. We keep shedding our excess baggage, accumulating fresh knowledge, removing the old. What was true yesterday may not be true today in our knowledge. So truth changes, reality changes, so naturally it's going to take you towards darkness. You're never sure. You always remain in the dark. That's what they meant. That is taking you towards darkness, meaning you remain in the dark, irrespective of whether you are ignorant or you're learned. You remain in the dark. You remain in the dark. Knowledge being always dichotomous remains incomplete, bipolar, dual, into relativity, plus and minus, positive and negative, good and bad, divine and devil, hot and cold. In order to have knowledge of the one aspect, we have to know its opposite. Otherwise we can't. Whereas knowledge is one. It cannot be segregated into two. It cannot be segregated into two. So spiritual knowledge was considered as the metaphysical knowledge of the spirit. And worldly knowledge is that of the body and the mind. And the mind, as we know, is constantly bubbling and chattering, restless. It's chattering subconsciously. constantly changing its faith, its opinions, its beliefs, not knowing, not having any stability. Forget about eternity, not having any stability. And that is why the sages further said, when all knowledge ends, what remains is the truth. When all knowledge ends. Because as long as knowledge remains, it will be prone to evolvement. It never ends. It will be prone to debate, arguments, and difference of opinions. So when all knowledge ends according to them, what remains is the truth and the ultimate reality. And the ultimate reality, how close this truth and reality are. This truth and reality. So the mind in its chattering is the observer observing the observed. All three are segregated. But when the mind becomes still, the observer observing the observed, the observer, through mind, through the thinking mind, observing the observed, when it becomes one, then there are no changes. Then it becomes absolute, in totality, in fullness, in wholesomeness. It is in totality. This knowledge is in totality. Now it is combined. The observer observing the observed. There is no separation. What remains is observation. The seeker seeking the sought realizes there is nothing to seek. There is nothing to seek. You are that sought. It's all the same. You are everything. It is because you that the universe exists. It is because of you. Everything that you perceive and conceive is there. Otherwise, neither is God there, nor is truth there, nor is reality there. So, there is no separation. And what remains is, in the observer observing the observed, is purely the observation. And the subject of spiritualism, in its metaphysical realm, says that observation is the subject of who you are. Because without observation, without awareness, without being able to become aware, the mind becoming aware, there is nothing. There is shunyata. So observation is who you are, combined, condensed into observer observing the observed through mind and body. Through mind and body. So that is how the subject of spiritualism relates to the subject of knowledge, that unless you know self-knowledge, there cannot be any self-awakening, self-experiencing, self-enlightenment or self-realization. Because in the end you realize there is nothing to enlighten, nothing to experience, because you're already enlightened. You already have that spirit within you, that art thou, tattvam asi. You already have that part of that unlimited knowledge, limitless knowledge in your brain, that potentiality which is lying dormant, which needs to be awakened, which is that spirit within you, which is that insight, which is that intelligence, which comes out in spontaneity, which comes out in stillness. That is why stillness is very important in the subject of spiritualism. Stillness means mind. When mind is focused, when mind is centered and not chattering, it's not still. In meditative awareness, in the presence of now and in spontaneity, the intelligence awakens and comes out to discover everything. And all that exists is not two. All that exists is not two. Just waves of energy. condensing into particles, into duality. So knowledge, worldly knowledge, is considered as darkness because it's not going to lead you to its final destination. Thank you for listening.